Hi, I'm Francina.
I'm Jackie.
And welcome to the Rest, Love, and Justice podcast.
This podcast is an inquiry into whether rest and love and justice can produce transformative social change. The dominant narrative is this overwork and this glorification of it, especially in the justice space. And here, we're going to question that notion.
Come sit with us as we meet our collective humanity and share stories around rest, love, and justice. It is our hope to create a shift that enables us to recognize that racial justice work is a human issue. It affects us all. Welcome, guys, to the very first video recording of our podcast, and we get to do it in real time together. Listen, the rest of the podcast, we're not going to be looking this fly. It's going to be on a Zoom screen. But we love that we get to share this story in real time together. And we thought it would be really cool for us to share the story of how we met and how this work emerged between us.
You want to start us off?
Sure. I met Jackie in a women's collective that I was invited to be a part of. And the very first day that we had the Zoom call where we met each other, we were put into Zoom groups, and it was the two of us together. I was so nervous, and I just remember just feeling so like, oh my gosh. I was the only Black woman in the groups. I was already feeling other for sure. And I think I even presenced that on the call. I was like, I'm just aware of how other I feel right now. And it was so wonderful to kind of get into the Zoom room with Jackie, and I felt so seen by her. Yeah.
I felt a lot of nerves that day as well. And then hearing about your wonderful tea business, Be Still Tea, I was just inspired about the work that you offer this world, and was so excited to be in this group with you.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of offerings that I did receive from the group, but ultimately the group proved to be very toxic. And, I want to hear in your words, but I witnessed, and you shared with me as well, your experiences and aggressions, microaggressions, I prefer to say aggressions, against you. And ultimately the group was not a place that you could be. For your spirit to continue to survive, that was not the space you could be in. And so, when you said you were out, I absolutely knew I was out. If the space isn't safe for you, it's not really safe for anyone. And I was just honored that you shared your spirit with me and what was happening. I feel not that I was necessarily deserving of that, but was just very grateful for your friendship, to be open to share with me. And it was an honor to walk out with you, hand in hand. And also knowing that space is informing what we're doing now, how to create community in a new way.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think before we get into the depth of the story, I just want to presence that this is really hard. It's a very hard story for me to share. And it's hard for me to share also as a Black woman, because I can definitely connect and lean into the vibe of some fear of disappointing people. And even as I share this story, I want to just make it really clear that this is my story. This is my story. And for Black women who are listening to this, you do not need the validation of other people to say that your story is true. If it's true for you, this is your truth. This is my truth. This is my story. And I stand in that. And I am overcoming my fear, leaning into this uncomfortable conversation to have, because I want to show the world that this does not define me. So a big part of this for me was, I remember even as I began in this program, I actually turned it down 3 times because I kept saying, I just don't feel like I fit. I don't see what I'm going to contribute or what I'm going to gain from this collective. And the one thing that one of the leaders said to me was, you will gain access to connections. And I thought, what the heck does that even mean? And once I got into the group, I realized that it was actually a collective that was set up for predominantly wealthy white women. And I say predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly. And I was added as kind of a diversity piece to that collective. And one of the big takeaways I got from being in that space was that I can no longer allow myself to be a part of any collective that is adding me as a diversity piece, but not committing themselves to doing the work of racial justice education, not only for the leadership, but also for the participants of the group, because they need to understand what having diversity in their spaces is going to mean. Every time I would share about something that was uncomfortable for me or something that didn't sit right with me, it was met with so much backlash where in hindsight now I realize that people were basically working out their racial aggressions on me because, I was kind of I was sharing my truth about what wasn't okay, and it was not well received. And even at the end of the program, I remember giving the leadership feedback about, like, I think you need a brown woman on this program to make your program better. They said, thank you. And they bounced. And I'll never forget, you know, after I had chosen to leave the program, almost a month later, I got an email from the leadership saying that they heard that there'd been a rupture in our group that had resulted in my exit. They had seen my email. I don't know who sent them the email, but they'd seen my email and they just were emailing me to find out if I still wanted to be on their emailing list. And I remember just like my heart dropped because I was like, wow, they're going to email me to find out if I still want to receive their emails, but they're not going to find out how I'm doing, what caused me to leave. Like none of that stuff mattered. And I remember in that moment just being like engulfed in that feeling of like, I don't matter. I don't matter. No one cared that I left. And I also will say, like, I think another really important piece, especially for white women who are in collective spaces, that maybe there is one or two or very few women of color or people of color in those spaces. Jackie's demonstration of allyship, and I will call it that because it felt like I never asked her. I didn't expect anything. I was like, I need to get out because I'm starting to doubt my value on this planet. And I was starting to have thoughts about harming myself, which was not productive. It was not good. And my husband looked at me and said, you got to get out. And I remember the day I decided to send the email, and there was just like this exhale, this liberation that came about, like, oh my gosh, I got myself out of there. And I remember Jackie sending me an email saying, if you're out, I'm out. And I remember just like falling and just crying because it felt like such a beautiful demonstration of love for me. Like, you believed my stories. You believed that my experience was different. You believed that my experience was causing me harm, and your commitment to doing work in spaces where people that look like me feel safe was strong enough to say, I'm out too. And that means the world to me. And I think it's birthed what we do now is, not only share stories, because I'm not going to include details of who it was or any of those kind of things, but because I don't want us to get stuck in that. That's not important. But the messages that we learn and leaning into the uncomfortable of that whole situation and then what emerged. Thank you for demonstrating such beautiful love for me.
It was an honor, and I'm just so grateful for this friendship. And it was also like a no-brainer in many ways. There was never like another thought about it. And it's okay if there is, for white bodies that don't really know how to practice allyship. I mean, we've talked about this, like there was this moment where you called me an ally, and like, I've never been called an ally. So there was this like, oh my gosh, awesome. And then there was this, oh gosh, what am I doing my whole life if this is the first time at 35 someone called me an ally? I was like, oh God, I wasn't really doing it right before. I thought I was doing some good work. So it was a complicated too in that as well.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately how our experience informs specifically this podcast, Rest and Love and Justice, you allowed me to witness the injustice in that program. And I'm not just saying like the aggressions within it, but also just how you weren't able to rest. You weren't able to be at ease because of the environment.
Yeah.
And so that's informing rest and love and justice in this conversation.
Yeah.
Because there's already so much injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when we're trying to create community and we're not doing it,
Yeah.
like that just doubles down on it.
Yeah.
And so, I just want to appreciate how you moved through, how you offered so much into that space, and you offered to support racial equity work, and that's brought us here. And
Yeah.
so there's some beauty,
Yeah.
and some possibility,
Yeah.
that's emerging, that I'm really excited about.
Me too. And part of it is like, doing the healing work of releasing yourself. And like, for my Black sisters, brown sisters who are in collective spaces, there was a deep fear in leaving that situation, that collective, because I felt like I was going to lose so much. And the reality is I found myself, y'all. I came back to myself. And, sometimes fear will keep us connected to places that are actually literally dwindling us down to nothing. And I literally had gotten to the place where I felt like I had no value and that maybe my life wasn't necessary on this planet. And no collective, no person ever has the right or the power to make you feel like you are not worthy of being on this planet. And if you are starting to doubt your value, it's time to bounce. And trust me, on the other side, there is an abundance of love, there's an abundance of hope, there is an abundance of people that are waiting and ready to receive the offerings that you have in this world. You don't need to stay in toxic situations or challenging situations, even if there are people that you love there. And I think that's an important piece for me to share in terms of like, from my perspective, I had people I loved that I was so heartbroken weren't willing to walk with me, or some that didn't want to believe my story. It was like, yeah, sure, it happened, but this is what we should do, or we should move on, or whatever. You can't move on from that without accountability, and also just people being willing to identify what parts they're playing in those types of situations, right? And so this beautiful work emerged after we bounced out of that group. And, I read something the other day that said something to the effect that when we enter into safe spaces, we feel exhausted. And I know that for myself, I had been carrying so much when I was in that group. And then I suddenly entered into this relationship with Jackie, and suddenly I was able to access just how much I was carrying. And I feel like in the exhale and leaning into how tired I was, we birthed what this podcast is, the Rest, Love, and Justice podcast. And we have another project that we're working on together that really is committed to investing in the rest and restoration of Black and brown women, which we will share at a different time. But yeah, and so Jackie, I was just, wondering if you had anything you wanted to share, whether it was just from your own experiences or challenges that you may have felt like held you back in that space, either from jumping in or speaking up about things. I think it's an important story for you to share, especially to some of our white listeners who may find themselves in situations and are struggling with like, do I say anything? Do I not? Like, give us a little window into like what's going on in your mind and your body. And
yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, there was no struggle. There was no like, oh, should I leave or not? It was like, oh my gosh. Like when we had that final call and you offered, to lead or help facilitate someone that would help chat, have us be more educated in racial equity as a group. When people didn't just instantly say yes,
Mm-hmm.
And then we gave a little more time, and then I was like, I'm out if we're not doing this.
Yeah.
It was a full body yes. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
this is it, it's time to walk. I think where it was more challenging is I wanted to speak up, I wanted to respond in, you know, the email thread as a group, but I really wanted to make sure I wasn't causing more harm to you.
Mm.
And I that's why this is so unjust, is because then I sent you an email and said, does this sound okay? But then that's more work that you're doing. You're looking at an email that I wrote and you have to think about that. So there was like no way around it really. Like it was going to be causing you energy in order to leave this group, and way more than me. And that was so obvious. And so I'm grateful that you did read my email. Like, is this okay? And within that, I said, can we compensate you for your time? And I sent that you said I could send that, even though I know it was complicated for you to see that as well.
Yeah.
But I sent that out to the group and said, can we compensate you, Francina? You're leaving, we're both leaving. But for the wealthy women in the group, can we compensate you for the weathering that this environment had caused to you?
Mm-hmm.
So that was important. And you know, we've sorted out ways. That was not something that was picked up by the group.
No.
But we have sorted out ways that we're working on that and worked on it and working on it. Some really creative ways, I think, coming soon.
Yeah.
But how to honor the work that it took for you to be in that group.
And I think it's an important point to bring up here that most white people don't recognize the cost on brown and indigenous people in spaces that are mostly white. Like you talk about the weathering, and I just had never thought about it. Like I felt like that was the way. I had to deplete myself or had to override my depletion to stay active and connected in spaces that were not feeling safe. And I will say too, to your point, I know there was like another woman in the group who, after I quit, invited us to something in an email. And I was like writing to her, like, look, I'm out. And I remember just feeling like I felt hurt by it, but also just like that weathering that you talked about. It was like one of the first times I really like connected with how weathering it was, because it was like, not only have I said I'm leaving, but now I'm getting invited to come back in to come and do something with the group. And I was like saying no. And I remember even like, and this, I think I'm sharing this because I'm always tracking, like, am I sharing from a place of woundedness, or am I sharing from a place, because if I'm going to share it, I want it to be productive. And I think this is an important piece, because I think it is a productive thing for our community to hear. When I said no, she wrote back and said, oh, I hope we can still be friends. And I said, I need some time because I needed space to heal. And I actually internally fully intended on reaching back out to her after I had healed. But then a couple months later, I remember going on Instagram and saw that she unfollowed me. And I remember just thinking, wow, I wasn't even given the liberty of time to heal. I was axed. It was like, you didn't want to stay friends in that moment, you're out. And I just want to bring this up too for white women who are listening to this. If there is weathering, actually not if, when there is weathering that is happening on brown people, black people, you have to lean into the discomfort of giving people the time that it requires for them to heal, come back to themselves, and show up in their strength. Just because it's not your timetable does not mean that they deserve to be axed, right? And that, for me, contributed to the pain, because I felt like I walked out and I lost so many. And even though I'd asked for the boundary, yes, I asked for the boundary, but that was not because I didn't love. It was because I needed to heal, right? Yeah. And there's a difference there. And I think people need to kind of sit and lean into that reality that, yeah, people need time to heal. And if you are really committing yourself to equity work, you want to be somebody who is learning and growing in racial equity work, you have to be willing to give people the space and time to show up in themselves, in their strength.
Yeah. And on that theme of time too, it was really interesting for me. I knew I can be pretty sluggish with emails and texts even, but I knew that there was a time that was appropriate for me to come in with you,
Yeah.
to have my voice be added to your voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember really like falling into my pattern of like, I'll get to it tomorrow. And then I was like, no, this is it. Like, this is now. So I even saw that in myself, like just the sluggishness and like some shame there of like, oh, just get to it. This is actually your most important thing today, Jackie, like to be in support of a friend, but even just to acknowledge that like, why was it slow? Like I could have done it faster. And so just acknowledging too, like when stepping up to have it be at the right time. And so allowing healing for others, and then knowing that timing and presencing what is happening as soon as possible often is important. And so that timing bit, in different ways. And I think that it's nuanced.
Yeah.
I think to white bodies, we want it to be like, okay, it's this way or it's this